Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. This week you'll meet Kass Patterson. Kass is a broadcaster and a storyteller who's made it her mission to bring agriculture and Western sports into the mainstream. Born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, Kass grew up surrounded by cattle and community, which sparked a lifelong love of storytelling. Since 2019, she's spent her summers traveling with the World Professional Chuckwagon Association, offering audiences an authentic, behind-the-scenes look at one of Western Canada's most exciting and misunderstood sports. In our episode today, Kass shares how she's blended her journalism career with her agricultural roots and why it matters that rural voices are heard both in social and legacy media, and how horses have helped her navigate mental health challenges along the way. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Kass. Kass, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm so happy to be talking to you, my friend, and sharing your story with my audience. I feel like we have switched roles as you have shared my story with your audience previously, but we'll get into more of that later before I fangirl too much. So Kass, for the folks listening, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what your connection to agriculture is.
So my name's Kass Patterson. I am from Southern Alberta. I was raised in the Calgary area, but now I am based out of the Lethbridge region. So that is kind of where I'm from. And my connection to agriculture, I actually grew up with my extended family being cattle farmers and spending time around their place. And as I've grown up, I've always had this love for the rural community, for the rural, lifestyle, and how agriculture happens in not only Alberta, but across the country, and how hard people work for it. So I, by trade, am a journalist, and I've basically spent the past decade, well, that sounds weird to say, but I've been a journalist for a decade. I don't know if I like this. Anyways, I've spent the past decade just trying to share, the stories of the agriculture community, the Western community, the rodeo community, and make sure that, people's stories are told in their own voices in a way that they are respected and loved.
I love this so much. So growing up with extended family in agriculture, what are some of your first memories when it came to farming and ranching and where your food came from?
Some of my first memories are actually as I said, my extended family had cattle. So there's a photo of me with this nice little calf as I'm out showing it at, I don't remember what kind of show it was. All I know is I was showing this calf. And its name, I still remember, the name was Buttercup. And the way I realized, where my food came from was at one point in time, my dad had made a joke when we were eating steak that's Buttercup. And to this day, I remember this. And I don't think he does. I swear he doesn't, because I've said it before. He kind of looks at me like, you're losing your mind, kid. But he did make that joke. So that is, where that realization of where my food came from started. And at another point in time, my great uncle, he owned some buffalo. So we would get some buffalo at that point, and my dad then showed me where the buffalo were from and, talked about the buffalo with me. And so that was, I was a little bit older, but again, realized where my food came from. From there, it's just kind of, learning from living in southern Alberta. You drive around and you see these giant crops and these lands of canola or wheat, or again, we're out in southern Alberta. There was a bunch of like fields of mustard seed. And I remember them just being yellow and beautiful. And especially outside of Calgary, it was just this beautiful thing. And so seeing all that and just the beauty of it, that's kind of where my love for it came from.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like most people who have somewhat of a connection to agriculture through extended family have had that similar conversation about Buttercup. Mine was Buddy Burgers, and they weren't from A&W. Thank you, Uncle Clifford.
That is fantastic.
Right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I love that. And honestly, it's, as we laugh about those things, it's true. Like, and I think it from both sides. You see it like the cow had a name or whatever it was that you're eating. But now I look at it as, yes, you might be eating Buddy or Buttercup, but like what a great life that animal had to be loved by a rancher or a farmer that had like a name for this cow and was, that's kind of how I think of it. Because when you're going to the grocery store, you don't know what that cow's name was.
No, it could have been just 1, 2, 3, 4 for all we know.
Exactly. Look at me getting all sentimental.
There's that beautiful thing of like that respect and that relationship between a rancher and a farmer and their animals, and them knowing that, it is our job to take care of this animal. And at the end of the day, this animal is going to sustain us and take care of us. I think as we've evolved as humans, we have become more sentimental and more attached. And that's where I know that system that a lot of ranchers have, and that, that's in place of, okay, this is the year for A, or this is the year for B or C. It doesn't take away that sentiment, but it does. It's almost a reminder of sorts of, okay, you know what? This is an animal that you have to have a mutual respect with, because it's not a pet. It's someone or something that's going to sustain you, but you have to sustain it. And so that's kind of my opinion on that.
So let's talk about your 10-year broadcasting career. What made you decide to go into broadcasting?
It kind of was a fluke. Growing up, I was told when I was younger, I used to be in both dance and horses. Fun fact, I'm actually horribly allergic to all livestock, horses, cattle, anything with dander. So at 12 years old, made the very difficult decision of I had to step away from horse riding. So I was an arts kid from about the time from 12 to 18. And I decided I wanted to go through for theater at Mount Royal University in Calgary. The year I applied, they got rid of the program.
Oh.
So it was back to the drawing board. As you can tell, I like to talk. So that started a conversation with my family. One of my favorite shows is Gilmore Girls, and Rory was my favorite character. That kind of ignited my want to be a journalist, which is really funny and dorky to say. But from there, I went to Mount Royal and just kind of had spectacular opportunities from there. I've worked in Okotoks and High River and covered a lot of small towns there. I got to work in Calgary for 2 years, 3 years, and got experience there. But I realized I don't like the big city. I like working in smaller, more connected communities, which is funny to say about Lethbridge, because you think about Lethbridge, it's a city. But it's really interesting because in Lethbridge, there's always the 4 points of connection where everybody knows everybody knows everybody knows everybody. So it really is a small town in a lot of senses. So that's where that all kind of came from, is it went from a desire to share stories on stage to then turned into a desire to share stories from people's point of views.
Oh, I love that. Love all of those pieces. And particularly love the millennial Gilmore Girl asset of all of these things, the aspect of it all. So during your career as a journalist and in broadcast, you have really taken a passion of blending agriculture stories into the mainstream media. Why has that been so important to you?
I think it's been so important to me because when I started, as I said, I started in Okotoks and High River, and the impact that that industry has in those communities, it was twofold. Like it was something that needed to be discussed and talked about, especially in High River with the feedlot being there and with, just how many farms and how much land is around that area. It was really important to me that it was discussed and it was shared. And also, I came into broadcasting at a time when it felt like the world started to change a bit. There was this really interesting shift in how things were viewed and how things were seen. And it was almost to an extent that we were seeing that rural story and that rural lifestyle get pushed back and only brought out during certain times. So it was only brought out, during Aggie Days, during the Calgary Stampede, during, big expos or that. And those smaller stories I felt were just being missed. And to me, those were the most important stories that needed to be shared. So I kind of have always taken it as this is a way that I can keep supporting a community that very largely says that they're forgotten. And it's important to me that people know that, media, it is a safe space. We are not here to make people look dumb. We're not here to hurt people. We're not here to, throw people under the bus. That cutthroat, malicious journalism that I think people believe is out there. Yes, there is some reporters who are like that, but the majority of us just want to have a conversation. We just want to learn. And then from learning from you, we get to educate the people we talk to.
In the masses, right? And especially for the people who don't have that personal connection to agriculture. How do you see your role as a journalist impacting public perception of agriculture and rural life?
That's interesting because I've always believed in taking myself out of the story. So it's hard to view that. But I think if I just take my 2 years, actually coming on 3 years between Lethbridge and Grand Prairie, it's been keeping those stories shared with those who live an urban lifestyle. Because it's not easy for people to understand, say, not to get political, but with everything going on with the tariffs. It's easy for us to say, this is going to impact our rural producers. This is going to impact them for this. And I can share every stat in the world. But unless I share a story from someone who's either working with a cattle farmer or someone who's from a cattle farmer association or from a wheat grower or anybody like that, unless I put a human aspect to it, it doesn't resonate because, again, it's just another stat. So that, I think, is my biggest job, is to make sure that people understand when I'm sharing a stat, I'm sharing a person. I'm sharing someone's life. I'm sharing someone's, their ability to live. And it's also vice versa. When we talk about things happening in the city, it's important that the people who are listening or reading us from a rural area are understanding, this isn't just a city problem. This is somebody's problem. This is somebody's life. And it's keeping that balance of everybody realizing, we're all on the same foot and we're all dealing with the same issues. We just are dealing with it different, whether it be you're trying to feed your dog or you're trying to feed your cow and your horse, which granted, the cow and horse are way more expensive to feed, but it's just a different scale of what someone's dealing with.
I would have to argue that when your dogs are the size of horses, it is equally expensive to feed Kevin and Carl. So
Okay, but then again, Kevin and Carl, they're so fluffy.
I know. And so expensive to feed.
That I can believe. I stick with small dogs.
Now from a word from our sponsor, so Caitlin can feed her dogs. Kass, what challenges do you think you've faced trying to introduce agriculture stories to an audience who might not have that direct experiencing with farming and ranching?
The education piece and also the jargon or the words that we use in a rural setting that makes sense to us, but if you say it to someone who's not from the rural setting, they don't understand. I think that's been probably the biggest learning curve for me, because I have had to remember, just because I understand what I'm talking about, it doesn't mean that Sally, who works at the beauty salon, is going to understand what I'm talking about. So that has been something I always try to keep in mind when I write these stories, is remember that just because we understand it and we get it and we know what we're talking about, so, that little minute detail might not be important to us, it is important to those people who are learning because they don't understand it.
Absolutely. Well, and I want to toot your horn, Kass, because I am from Lethbridge originally, and our farm is near Lethbridge, and born and raised in a city that is surrounded by agriculture. And being a person who listens to the radio and hears your beautiful voice all day, every day during harvest, I think you do a really great job of telling our stories in agriculture in the local area. And as I had mentioned before, you've got to share my story a couple years ago now while I hosted a local event. So thank you for sharing our stories, and thank you for putting that human aspect in all of the stories that you share.
Well, thank you for listening, because that means that you're helping me pay for my dog to eat. So we're helping each other out here.
Well, it's just two girls with really great radio voices here just chatting away. So one of the other big aspects of your life is the Western sports world. So talk to me about kind of your journey into Western sports. You mentioned before about your love of horses, sans allergies. So let's kind of start there. And what was that like for you as a young kid, not being able to really do what you love and have to go in that different direction?
It was interesting growing up because again, the horses were at my extended families, but I had my favorite one. Her name was Carousel. I was a part of a program called Pony Club, which was based just south of Calgary. There's clubs all over the place, but that was just where my club was based out of. And I loved it because I got to learn about the horses. I got to, there was the whole book education thing, and then you got to, ride in the spring and do all that stuff. I always knew I had a bit of an allergy because my eyes would water if I rubbed them. Like if I would go riding and then rub my eyes right away after, my eyes would just start getting red and they'd hurt. So that was kind of the start and what ended up pushing us to make the decision, or me to make the decision to do dance, because it was just I thought I could go ride, whenever afterwards. I didn't have to, constantly do this. I went 2 years without riding, which, kind of sucked, but I still loved horses and still, would go and watch them whenever I could. And I went riding for the first time after, and I turned into the elephant child when I started brushing the horse out. My face exploded, my eyes were blotchy, my skin was blotchy. It was not a pretty sight. My mom rushed me into a shower to wash me off to try to fix that. It was all fun and games. So I took quite a bit of time from there until, I was about 18, 19, when I started going back around horses again. And I just would dope myself up with a lot of antihistamines. But even during that time, my favorite part of my summer was going and watching the Chuckwagons. It was the family event. I had my favorite Chuckwagon that I cheered for. The driver's name was Jason Glass. I'd just always grown up cheering for the checkerboard because that's the design that's on his wagon. So as I got older and as I went into broadcasting school and, going into actually being a reporter, one of my dreams was just to keep sharing that story and keep sharing that sport, because the more I talk to people, it's a lot like the rural community. If you didn't grow up with it, or if you hadn't seen it, or if you hadn't already been immersed in it, you were just learning or it was foreign to you. So that was always my goal, was to kind of share their stories and share that. There was a situation in 2019 that was quite newsworthy, but I had an issue with how we covered it in Calgary. And my issue was we didn't want to hear both sides. I was told to cover one side and one side only, and to basically vilify the other side, which I wasn't willing to do. So I was then told I had to hand over my contacts. I did not do that. I called a mentor of mine and said, this is what I'm being told by a manager. And he said, you do not give a contact over unless the contact says it's okay. And I said, okay, I'm in the right of what I'm thinking. And from there, I ended up calling one of my best friends he was racing in a different circuit, but his name is Dayton Sutherland. And poor Dayton listened to me probably 4 times that week, call him and just rant. And I was mad, I was angry, I was upset. And I said, I want to tell these stories. I want to tell your stories and not be told I have to make these people the villains because someone doesn't understand the sport. And from there, we kind of created, a way to tell the stories with creating a brand called After the Ninth. It included podcasts. It still includes podcasts. But again, working a full-time job and podcasting, not always the easiest thing in the world. We're figuring it out again. But it's also created doing interviews in a different format by just doing video interviews and just sharing and educating. So that's kind of how that's all gone for me. And it's also opened doors into places like PBR and rodeo, which were not areas I ever imagined I'd go because I wasn't connected to them. But it's all intertwined.
Well, and it's Western sports, right? And it's something actually that I learned more about this past winter when I was touring with the voice of Canada's PBR through the Young Farmer Summit with FCC, Brett Gardner. He was our mental health speaker, and learned more about really the sports aspect of it versus the spectator of me going to see PBR or going to the rodeo at the fair or all of those things. It's all of the other aspects that I never thought of. It's the people aspect of it that we don't think of. And when we think of professional athletes, we kind of think of the Connor McDavids, the Michael Jordans, those kinds of things. But in the Western sports world, there are people who are that caliber of that in their own sports. So talk to me about kind of breaking into reporting these stories and sharing these stories. Was this something that Chuckwagon drivers were open to, or was this something that was kind of foreign to them?
Well, first off, I want to touch on, you had the best mentor then, because Brett is one of my favorite people ever and is just the nicest human ever. And I'm still trying to get one of those Good Days sweatshirts. One of these days I will get one.
I told Brett Gardner that if I interviewed the men's, he would be one of my first calls. So he's good stuff.
He still owes me an interview, so I get mine first. Brett, if you're listening, You owe me an interview. But
make it happen.
As for getting into, reporting in Chuckwagons, I started, when I was in Okotoks when I was 19. And the local drivers were the nicest humans in the world. And it's actually how I met Dayton. I met him through his dad, Mark. And all it took when I was 19 was sending Jason Glass, who I talked about, Jordy Fike, and Mark Sutherland messages saying, hey, I want to cover you as the local athlete. How do we do this? And each one of them allowed me to come out to their ranch and, taught me. Jordy taught me what truck training was. Mark showed me, how they take care of the horses and how they make sure they're up to snuff. Jason showed me around his training barn and, just showed me around the ranch, which again, I fangirled about at the time. Now he's one of my favorite humans in the world, so I don't fangirl as much. But they're open to having those conversations. As we got into, 2019 and starting this podcast, they were all game for it. It's just the Western world media has not always been their friend. And that situation I talk about in 2019 when I was reporting in Calgary, that's a prime example of it. Is unfortunately in that situation, we lost animals. We lost horses. I say we, but it was the drivers. But they didn't talk about how important those horses were to the drivers. They talked about how the drivers abused them, how the drivers didn't care about them. They used them for sport. And I can tell you for a fact, that's not the case. Those drivers, when we say, or when anyone says, the drivers eat after the horses, it's not just we're saying it. The drivers eat after the horses. The horses are the first thing. They come before anything else. Not before their kids. Like, their kids, of course, are important. But before anything else that has to do with them or taking care of themselves, their horses are what they will die for. And when you go to a driver and you say, I want to tell that, I want you to tell me about why these horses are important to you and why you love this sport. They're open to it, but they are cautious. And it's taken 5 years to build these relationships where, I have drivers who now know that they can call me and that I'm more than willing to talk to them. I now am a huge advocate for every stop on the tour. We need to talk to the media. We need to share these stories. We can't just share on social media and share to our inner circle. Because at the end of the day, we all know what we're doing. We all know why we love these horses. We all know each other. We know, how ex-drivers, Goofy and ex-outrider, they like to do silly things behind the chutes to like amp themselves up. But someone like you wouldn't know that.
Right. So Chuckwagon racing isn't familiar for everyone. Shocker, I know. Can you give us the behind the scenes look of this sport and why it's so special to you?
So wagon racing is the NASCAR of the West, is what Guy Fieri once called it at the Calgary Stampede, and it's been my favorite way to explain it ever since. It is 3 to 4 wagons, which have 4 horses hooked up to it, and you start in what we called an infield, which is just a very large space. Then you have to do a figure 8 around 2 barrels. You have a barrel that you are set on. You can't just pick any 2 barrels. You have 2 barrels assigned to you that you have to do the figure 8 around. And then you race around this track, and you are followed in our circuit, the WPCA, and in the Canadian Professional Chuckwagon Association by 2 outriders who are on horseback, and they're just behind you. And it's the first guy to the finish line with the fastest time and the least penalties, usually, that ends up winning. The interesting connection of Chuckwagon racing to agriculture is back when it originally started, it was, guys were racing from the saloon back to camp to, pitch their tent, start their fire, and the first one who had the fire won. And as it became a sport, the sponsors were actually farms or ranches, which is the coolest thing to me. And it's something I think people don't actually know or they forget. But for a very, very long time, the drivers were sponsored by a farm. So the tarps that you now see with Birchcliff Energy or de Havilland Aircraft or, Shaw GMC, these are just the big ones that are sticking out my mind at the moment. Those used to be Jay and Sons Ranch or the YL Ranch. And it used to be how, these ranches were connected to the Western sport and used to just have fun, but also got their name out there for, advertising. That is continued in some cases because there are still ranches or there are still, agriculture industries that do support Chuckwagon racing and come on as sponsors and do tarps. But that's the history of it, which I think is the coolest thing. I could get down into the nitty gritty and teach you all about penalties and about interference and about this, that, and the other thing. I'm not going to bore you with that, but if anyone ever wants to be educated on it, feel free to reach out because I have a lot of that information now stuck in my brain and I am never going to get rid of it.
It will always be there. Well, the fun fact about Chuckwagon racing and specifically the Calgary Stampede, it is my dad's favorite event to watch for the Calgary Stampede. And most people on the Rural Woman podcast are a big fan of Ronnie. So there you go. That's your tidbit from me.
Well, thank you to your dad for liking Chuckwagon racing.
Absolutely. So since 2019, you've been traveling with the World Professional Chuckwagon Association. What have been some of those unforgettable moments or stories that you've captured that you've been able to share?
It's funny because it's hard to just pick a few. I guess, some of the stories maybe that I can say I've captured right away is seeing the return of Ray Crotto Jr. He took years off and then came back and is now, one of our top drivers again. And it's because he loves the sport and he loves his horses. I've gotten to share Chad Fike, him and Caitlin. They have an amazing barn. In 2020 and 2021, I got to really start spending time with the two of them and, do training and go through that. And it's been really fun to watch Chad go from being, in that 14, 15 area to now he's again in that top 5. And he's one of the strongest drivers I know. Jason, coming back last year to win the Calgary Stampede. The last time he won it, I was in high school. So being able to share that story and also now having Bodie, his son, who his wife Bree will say they never thought was going to be, totally interested in wagons or in wagon driving. Bodie now is one of the first people you see in the barn. He's in there helping doctor the horses. He has his favorites. He's, jumping them and he's in the box with Jason, helping Jason drive. Those are some of the stories that just really amplify the care and the love that goes into this sport. Some of the stories you don't see are the stories that are the ones that are the most impactful. And they're the stories that, you want to share, but sometimes that you have to be respectful and you have to take a step back and remember that human element. In 2021, Chad and Caitlin lost a horse named Oath, which was one of my mom's favorite horses in their barn and one of my brother's too. And my brother was helping Chad at the time. And I remember just coming back because I was for the past 4 years, not only have I shared their stories and been that side, but I've also been on the judging side. I've been a camera operator, and for the past 2 years, I was the race secretary, which I'm taking the step back from this year. But I came back from what we call review, which is where, people can protest their penalties and say, hey, can you re-look at this? They have to pay money, of course, for them to be really looked at. But If they're right, they get their money back. If they're not, then their money goes back to the association. But I came back from review, and my dad said it was oath, and I remember my heart broke because he was probably the biggest jerk of a horse I'd ever met, but he loved his job. He ran. That's all he cared about. That's all he wanted to do. And the next year, we had a similar situation with Dayton. If you go on my social media, you'll see I talk a lot about a horse named Bogart, who's my favorite horse that Dayton's had. And Bogart's friend was named Nevada. Nevada and I had a love-hate relationship. We could not love each other, but we also could not hate each other. Dayton's horse went down in High River. I didn't know who was on the wagon that night. All I know is I saw the horse go down in the back stretch as they were going to come off the track. And I was sick to my stomach that entire, the rest of the heats, because I didn't know what horse it was. I didn't know who it was. And I had one of our judges, I was like, can you find out? Can you just radio to find out? And he's like, you don't want to know right now. I said, okay. And I came out of review again, and I ran into his barn hand, and I asked, who was it? And she said, Nevada. I picked up my phone and I called my mom because I was in tears. And I just said, Mom, Nevada's dead. And she just let me cry because I knew how much that was going to hurt him because he loved that horse. And I knew how much it was going to hurt his girlfriend, Sierra, because she loved that horse. And I couldn't do anything to help because I knew the pain that it would cause.
In these stories, and in knowing what I know about Western sports, mind you, is not a lot. But the mental health aspect of all of this, that is what I think of, right? We put our heart and souls into our farms and our ranches. And for these people, they're putting their heart and soul into this sport and to these animals. What have you seen when it comes to the impact, not only of losing races and losing animals? What impact does it have on the industry's mental health?
There's a saying, and I was told it by one of the old presidents of the High River Egg Society. It was, the outside of a horse is good for the inside of a human. And I think that's the best way to describe it, because loss is hard, especially when you lose a horse and you walk into that barn and there's that empty stall. As someone who's just a friend and who just loves those horses from the outside, it kills me. But I can't imagine how the drivers and the families actually feel when they walk into that barn and there's an empty stall. And I know there is the mentality that you sometimes have to have of, again, they're not pets. They're your work, but you love them with every bit of your being and every bit of your heart. So that is an interesting thing because it comes back to, community and leaning on each other. And I know a lot of people on the Wagon Trail, if you have a hard day, you go to where the horses are to just sit and watch them because that's where the peace is. Or you can go in and, pet them and scratch them and love them because that's where you can find peace. When it comes to losing races, that's a different story because that, in my opinion, comes back to, you have to have a little bit of a mindset of okay, I'm going to lose. If I lose, I lose. It's a new race the next day. You can't take it with you back onto the track. And I've learned that from the different drivers who have said it's just another race. It's easy to get caught up in moments, and I admire all these guys because they all seem to have the same mentality of it's just another race, and they don't let it get them down. And if they don't finish where they want last season, well, we got 7 months and then it's spring training and we can try again for next year. It's interesting just the way the Western world works. we in Chuckwagon racing are a little bit different because the guys travel with 22, 23 horses at a time, a little bit more than, say, a bull rider who doesn't travel with any animals, or a barrel racer who maybe has 2 or 3 they travel with. So I think at the end of the day, the mental health aspect is the same for us all. Of you have to remember that in some instances it's nature, in some instances it's nurture, and in some instances it's finding what works for you.
Absolutely. I love that. Kass, tell me what your plans are for this summer in your upcoming season of Chuckwagon racing. What are you looking forward to?
Well, actually, so very cool thing I just learned. The radio station I work with and the Chuckwagon Association I work with are now partners. So I will be traveling again like I have the past 4 or 5 years. I guess 2020 I didn't really travel. We had a couple of like off association fun runs, but we didn't travel like we usually do. But I am going to be back on the Wagon Trail. I will be doing a race report for the local radio station and actually all Vista radio stations across the province. And then I will be on the radio broadcast that will be airing out of Olds. So I will be doing all that fun stuff this year. And now that I'm not race secretary, I will actually have more time to do the videos and do the interviews I want and share the behind the scenes. Doing race secretary was kind of how I paid to get down the road for the past 4 years. But it turns out, you can't do a lot of videotaping while you're up in the stand doing one thing when all the action is on the ground doing another thing.
Well, that's so exciting, and congratulations for that. That is big for you. And I'm excited to tune in and hear all of the good Chuckwagon stuff while I'm in the tractor working all summer.
Well, I will let you know when it airs. I'll send you a message and be like, Caitlin, it's coming up. Tune in.
It's coming. Turn on the radio station. That's awesome. Kass, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and sharing the stories of so many others in the Western sports world. My last question for you is, what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
The most rewarding part about being a rural woman is supporting community. That's probably the extent of that answer.
Honestly, you do it so well. And thank you for supporting us. And we're excited to support you. For folks who would like to connect with you after the show, where can they find you online?
On Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, it's Kass on Air. And on Facebook, it's just Kass Patterson.
Perfect. I will link all of those in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for, being able to help let me share this story. I know I had to reschedule a couple times because it's been a really crazy year of news. So I appreciate you being willing to work with me on it.
Absolutely. Here for it. Thanks, Kass. Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and a special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at the Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story.